My name is Angela White. I'm from the Snuneymuxw Nation. It's on Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. I work with the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, and my job is to go into various educational facilities such as high schools, universities, colleges, churches, legal aid, and provide this history from an Aboriginal perspective. They are what it's all about. They are the future of what we're trying to change in this country. That perception, that stereotype. And that's why I do the job that I do, because they are our precious ones. And at some point, it's going to be them up here, standing where I am, doing the exact same thing, but providing maybe something more positive for our future. Because we know what our history is, and that's what we want to change. And to them, I just want to say, Haitsepka Nisqualan, Mr. Dimoch from Snuneymuxw. Thank you very much on behalf of my people. I asked these questions at the very beginning. My purpose here is not to change anybody's minds. My purpose here is to provide information that I researched and received from archives. And it's up to you on how you utilize this information, not just in your careers, but maybe in your personal lives. Perhaps it's something that will come now, come later, come 25 years from now. Because when we actually think of school, we think of something different today than what it was for our survivors. School back then wasn't about education. It wasn't about providing a positive future for them. Indian residential schools first started out as something called industrial schools. And what is an industrial school? It was to provide a trade for a race of people so that when they joined civilization, they'd have a place in society. What were those trades? The cooking, the cleaning, the sewing, the farm work, those type of things. It wasn't anything grandeur. And I say this, and I want to make a point of it, because I actually did this up in Williams Lake. I don't normally do a lot of Aboriginal audiences, because when you think of Indian residential school, it brings up some very negative memories, and they're not ready to hear some of those yet. But when I was talking to this elder and presenting to him, he started tears streaming down his face. And he said, I spent 11 years in that school, and to this day, I do not know how to read and write. He maybe had a grade 2 reading level, couldn't even write his name, and he was 70 years old. So that's why I bring it up and bring it forward in that way. These were never about education. These schools started with one thing, and it was something that this country, pre-Confederation, decided was a problem, and that was the Indian problem. That term did not just come here from this country, it came from other countries like Australia and the United States. But while we're going through this presentation, ask yourself these other questions. Why was this a problem? Whose problem was it? And why did we have to go through so much trouble to try and resolve, rectify, and fix that problem? One question that I don't have up here is just put yourself in their shoes for that one moment. Just imagine what it would have been like. How these things would have impacted not just your life, but your children's lives and your grandchildren's lives, and how that would have impacted that family structure. Because to me, when we think of colonialism, we think of some of the great things that it brought, the technologies, all of these wonderful things that we deal with today. But we often forget about that negativity. Because for me, for the Aboriginal people of this country, it's too neat, too tidy, too pretty of a word for what happened to us. We accept and evolved with the times. But we also need to recognize and acknowledge where we came from. why we are the way we are, and why those struggles are there to this day. I begin with first contact in BC. And that's in 1778 with Captain James Cook. You got to remember, when he came into Nootka Sound and met up with Chief McQuina, Chief McQuina's probably standing on the beach looking at this thing going, what the heck is that? Bigger than our canoes, you know? And then the people on those ships, well, many of them were starving, many of them were sick, many of them were on their deathbeds. And so when Chief McQuina went out there, he met them. It wasn't anything about hostility. It was about peace and friendship. Stocked them up, fed them, got them well. They went along their way. But along the way, when they went back, they had one other thing that they didn't have when they came here. And that was the Pacific Northwest fur. And we all know how that impacted this country. Pacific Northwest Trading Company didn't last as long as the Hudson Bay Company, but it still had that impact at the beginning. This is the Royal Proclamation of 1763. Why is it important? Well, King George III, when he actually wrote this, he said, if we're going to go in and start taking things and colonizing all these countries and claiming it as our own, we can't do that, especially if there are indigenous people there. You notice I'm using the word indigenous, because this isn't just for this country, it was for all countries that they went to go and claim. And so what he was saying is, they have this thing called indigenous sovereignty. And the only way we can extinguish that sovereignty is through negotiated treaties. And I, being the king and the British Crown, can be the only one to negotiate those treaties. This later becomes really important when we as a country here in Canada become confederated and our own sovereign nation. In the meantime, as I was reading this document and researching it, a few questions came to my mind. Was this for the purpose and benefit of those indigenous populations? Or was it perhaps the king of the day was saying, well, what if they have this thing called sovereignty? What if they do own everything, the lands and the resources? And if we don't extinguish those, then we will have come here for nothing, because we will leave with nothing. Just two questions that I pose. I will probably never be able to answer any of those questions that I asked you. And as I pose questions, it's not for me to answer for you either. I'm leaving it for you to find your own answers. This is one of the first policies, legislations, or laws that were implemented pre-Confederation. It is called the Gradual Civilization Act of 1857. What was this one about? It was for Aboriginal males 18 to 19 years of age, if they spoke a little English, if they wrote a little English, if they weren't causing problems in society, it was offered to them. You can join civilization if you give up your identity of being Aboriginal. But wait, that's not all. We have door number 3 here too. Behind door number 3 is we will give you 50 acres of land for that exchange of your identity, so you can start your new life. This is what they termed as voluntary enfranchisement. You give up your identity and you become a part of civilization. With these policies and legislations coming into place, Canada, pre-Canada I should say, needed to have a central location. So they enacted the Indian Lands Act of 1860. It became the first centralized Aboriginal affairs. This fella here is bigger than I normally am used to because I'm on a smaller screen. He became our chief superintendent and the authority for all Aboriginals from East Coast to West Coast. And it continued this way until 1867, when we became confederated. The first school in BC to open its doors was in 1861. St. Mary's in Mission off the Lougheed Highway. It is the longest run and operated school in this province, closed its doors in 1984. Today, it's a regional park. Today, there's no remnants of these buildings whatsoever. If you walk the grounds, kick back the soil and the grass, you might find a few of the concrete footings where the buildings once stood. But other than that, there is no acknowledgement that the school was ever there. There's no memory of the students that attended there. I'm hoping that's about to change, because in this summer, I believe the Statlo people are actually going to commemorate the school with a totem pole and acknowledgement of the children that attended this school, as well as those that did not make it home alive. 70% of all schools operated in this country were operated and run by the Catholic Church. So we as a country are starting to become our own sovereign nation. Our father of Confederation, which is Sir Jonny MacDonald, had a few things on his plate. One of which was to protect the boundaries of Canada. He knew what was up, because we just had the War of 1812. What was that all about? United States coming over and trying to take over all our boundaries. This is the map of Confederation. That Royal Proclamation, well, the British Crown ended up saying, now that you, Canada, are becoming your own sovereign nation, I am going to delegate our fiduciary responsibility to you. We're not going to negotiate these treaties that are in the Royal Proclamation. It's going to be up to you. And so as you can see, when they started that declaration of securing our boundaries, building the largest mode of transportation at that time this country has ever seen, the railroad, he couldn't just do so because the proclamation said we have to extinguish that sovereignty. And there began the numbered treaties, as well as a few other things that happened. One interesting tidbit that I found in my research is the United States actually did offer to buy Rupert's Land for a significant amount of money. Hudson Bay Company said, no, that's not what we want, and later sold it to Canada probably for a fraction of the cost. I think the United States offered about $1 million and sold it to Canada for about $100,000. The only other problem with this is you have, because we were not considered human beings at that time, we were not considered a part of Canada, we weren't worthy enough. And so what you end up having is one man sitting on the same side of the table negotiating both sides of the treaties, because we were wards to the state. We weren't part of this country. So my only question to you is, what do you think those treaties are going to look like? Who are they going to benefit? In today's day and age, we call that a conflict of interest. I put this up here. It's an interesting story why I put it up here, but this is a letter that was taken in 1938 from Reverend Caldwells to the local Indian agent. Because one thing that some people don't understand is each First Nation community that was here in Canada was assigned an Indian agent. His job was to ensure that all of those rules, these laws, regulations were followed to the T. He had ultimate authority over the people on those reserves. I was in a Social Justice 12 class in Coquitlam, and this young fella said to me, put up his hand very politely and said, "There's enough of you. Why didn't you guys just go and take over the school? Make change for yourself." He was obviously new to this country, because he said, when I went to school in China, we had a teacher that was just as bad. He beat us up and did all of this stuff. He goes, we gathered together as boys and we beat the crap out of him. It didn't happen again. He was nice after that. I was kind of went, well, that's an interesting approach. But we got to remember, back in the day, it was a little bit different. When the ships came over, they not only just did bring all this other stuff like technology and new theories and whatnot, it also brought disease and wiped out many, many villages. That being said, we do have a village in back east that was completely obliterated, and that was the Beothuks. They were extinct because of a lot of the diseases that came. as well. So how do you fight back when you're just really struggling to survive yourself? This letter was in 1938. It's not that long ago. And it just explains what the ideas and the mentality towards the Aboriginal people actually was. The problem with the Indians is one of morality and religion. They lack the basic fundamentals of civilized thought and spirit, which explains their childlike behavior. At our schools, we strive to turn them into mature Christians and giving up their barbaric way of life, including their treaties. And only then will that Indian problem be resolved. That was in 1938. You can imagine how this all came about. And it's just putting together those pieces to show this is what society thought about this race of people because of who they prayed to, their language, the places that they lived in, the structures, and all of those things. How they led their people did not make sense. But their thought was, don't worry, it's okay. You may have been born this way, but we're here to help you. We're here to fix you and make you into what we believe is the best situation for you. When assimilation and integration wasn't taking place as quickly as they had hoped, they enacted this law. It was the Gradual Enfranchisement of Indians. Now this is after Confederation, so we are now Canada. This is the first introduction of self-government and democracy. In our cultures, women had a distinct place in our societies. They had a voice, a very significant voice. Nobody was better or greater than the other. And so when you actually have people coming over and seeing women with all of this structure, maybe they're not going to want to talk to them so readily, because back in the day, women did not have a place in society either. These laws always excluded women completely. Just based on that last letter, you understand now why these laws were always paternalistic in nature, because they knew what was best for us, just like any parent always says. You do it this way because we say so. I know my mom said that to me a lot. And another voluntary enfranchisement mechanism, because there wasn't a lot of other women here except for the local Aboriginal women. And they were the only ones available to create families, have children with. In turn, gave us our Métis people here today. But the government said, if you're going to choose to marry a non-Aboriginal, you're going to lose your identity of being Indian, including your children. This law was enacted in 1861 and stayed that way until 1981 when Bill C-31 was changed. I'm getting confused up here for a sec, so if I look dazed and confused, you know why. 3 times and I'm losing it. Anyway, that is many, many generations that are lost, all for the sake of trying to eliminate and resolve that Indian problem. Canada, you as officials and know about policies, procedures, and all that, especially if you get funding from province or Canada, they like to know, are we meeting our goals and objectives? And you need to show us how we're meeting those goals and objectives. They hired this man, Nicholas Flood Davin. His job was to find the most effective means of civilizing the Indian population of this country. He went down to the United States where residential schools were up and running in full force. And when he came back, his report very simply stated, we have no hope of changing the adults. They're stuck in their ways. We can't change them. Our most effective means is going for the children and separating them from all of their negative influences. Who are their negative influences? Parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents. Because in Aboriginal culture, children were not necessarily brought up specifically by their parents. Those teachings came down from the elders, and the uncles and the aunts taught them other things as well, how to hunt, how to sew, how to do all of these other things as well. The medicines that they're supposed to do, how to prep the food. All of these were done not just by the parents. So I ask you, this was the beginning of that whole line of we have to take the children and put them into these institutions and change them into what we want them to be. Just a side note, the first schools in Canada was in the 1840s, and that was in Ontario.